The man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Genesis chapter 2, verse 25.
You don't have to be naked with your spouse to realize the two of you were created differently. Studies show that men and women have far more differences than similarities in all dimensions: physical, mental, and emotional.
A deceitful unisex mentality permeates this atomistic culture. Because of this deception, a growing source of problems in marriages is the failure of spouses to fully understand how different they are from each other.
For example, how you learn and what motivates you are distinctly different between the genders.
Even the government recognizes that innate gender differences exist. As the percentage of women in the military was increasing during the Vietnam era, government leaders needed to understand the differences between men and women so they could make adjustments in training and assignment.
These studies showed men and women to be 97% different. Brain function, hormones, and a variety of other influences make men and women two very unique representations of humanity.
Any number of these differences can be points of frustration or misinterpretation between husbands and wives. What better place to discuss these differences than in the home, where they're likeliest to be played out in conflicting ways?
And so many families are either overstressed or have already disintegrated that few parents are spending time in meaningful conversations with their children.
It's no surprise that so many young people are entering marriage with false assumptions about the opposite sex.
They've gotten all their so-called knowledge from their peers or from the media.
Genetic predisposition is also a key factor in why you respond as you do, often in ways totally opposite your mates.
I grew up surrounded by a large intergenerational extended family. As a boy, at family gatherings, I overheard adult conversations. By observation, I learned a lot about the strong influence of heredity on why people act as they do. I came to realize how much I was like my mother's dad, who died when I was a year old.
Heredity plays a large part in who you are. One ministry which specializes in families emphasizes that over 65% of your response to your environment is genetically predetermined. Many people who are planning to marry would benefit by spending more time with their intended in-laws for a clearer picture of their spouse-to-be.
Probably the most frequent question between spouses is, why can't you understand me? Ignorance of both the genetic and gender influences can create some very painful adjustments after the wedding takes place.
As we mentioned, studies reveal vast differences between the genders in terms of thought processes, perspectives, and emotional influences, as well as all sorts of physical variants.
Dr. Donald Joy is a professor of human development and family studies at Asbury Theological Seminary. According to his research, the manner in which males and females process information in their brains is strikingly different.
Women are able to simultaneously access both sides of their brain. But the two hemispheres of a man's brain are connected by smaller corpus callosum, the pathway by which information flows.
While a male baby is still in his mother's womb, she produces antibodies which hinder the growth of this connector. This affects how men think.
Women are able to immediately access past experiences from both hemispheres of their brain and come to speedy conclusions.
But men predominate strongly in either their analytical left hemisphere or in their affective, emotional right hemisphere. They need more time to sort, analyze, and conclude.
Couples who aren't aware of these differences in the way they think experience frustration or irritation. She grumbles, "Why can't he see things my way?" But God has wired them differently to make them mutually interdependent.
A little review here might help women understand why their husbands or fathers or sons tackle problems from a different perspective than they do. Men do predominate in either their left or right hemisphere. The majority of men in this nation are right-handed and left-brained. That's their analytical logic side. As a result, they depend to a far greater degree on analytical logic than on their emotional, affective right hemisphere. Before a man makes a decision, information has to add up for him. And processing information, especially emotionally laden information, takes longer for him than it does for women.
Most theological textbooks and topics that are taught to Western Christians have been logically compiled by right-handed men. An intellectual framework puts the relationship between God and His beloved people in a cognitive box. With that approach, little if any life transformation takes place in most men. Men who have no experience with Hebraic, love-grounded, obedient trust get to know a lot of content about God, but few know Him in the emotional intimacy of a covenant relationship.
God is our life transformer to know and experience, not an academic subject to be studied and evaluated.
That's one reason why women, who can easily access both brain hemispheres, can relate to God through their heart as well as their mind.
It's not impossible for men to experience God with their heart because they do have an affective right side to their brain.
But the stoic, unemotional influence of Hellenism, both in Christendom and in society, hinders a man.
Remember, men, we can access both sides of our brain. We're just slower in the process than women are.
Again, and most regrettably, the stoic influence of Hellenism has hindered many right-handed Christian men from even wanting to access the emotional side of their brain. It's scary for them.
The stoic influence produces a worldview that men don't cry, and that emotional expression among men should be quenched.
When men aren't reluctant to access their affective side, they begin to understand love, compassion, and mercy, the tender side of God. Using the right side of the brain is crucial if men are to restore the Hebraic foundations to their lives and families, and to grow into Christ's likeness.
Men, biblical mercy, love, compassion, and sympathy can never be manifested if the right side of your brain isn't accessed.
And wives who understand this internal struggle will come along without criticism to patiently help their man.
We realize that no spouse can learn everything about what motivates their mate or causes them to come up with such different responses.
But that there are major differences illustrates the interdependence that God desires for marriage covenant partners. That's when they'll experience wholeness in their union with the help of His Spirit.
It takes real humility for a couple to appreciate their differences and their need for interdependence. When you achieve unity in your marriage, you know that God has been the source.
Too often, rather than growing in appreciation of the differences in God's design for interdependence, husbands and wives criticize each other for their unique ways of going about things.
Criticism is egocentric. It impedes what our Lord could do in and through your marriage.
We'll be discussing more about the differences in biblical issues facing men and women in later lessons.
How well do you know yourself? On paper, take at least 10 minutes to describe yourself, your motivations, tastes, and shortcomings. Then talk your response over with your spouse.
If you're a wife, describe the positives and negatives you see in your marriage based on whether your husband is right-handed, mainly logical, or left-handed, mainly affective and emotional.
Both genders, take a little time to reflect. What don't you like about the way your spouse thinks? What don't you like about the way you think?
What are the strengths of thought processes and decision-making that you bring into your marriage based on your gender? What are the strengths your spouse brings?
Briefly describe how you perceive that God views your gender contribution to your marriage. Then describe how He views your spouse's contribution.